All right, I think that it's time for me to adjust my assessment of the situation in Russia and Ukraine, and not because I think that I was wrong in the past, I just think the situation is changing. At this point, I'm afraid that the window for a negotiated peace that is, let's say, pretty fair and reasonable is kind of, it's closed. I am sad to say this, but the Ukrainians have pushed their luck too far. Their grandstanding knows no ends, as they've made absolutely clear. And so at this point, I think that the Russians have no real reason to compromise at all. I think that they haven't changed what their official demands are, but I think that at this point, they know that the Ukrainians are not going to accept those demands anyway. So, they're going to go on feigning that that's all they want, that they just want Donbas and Crimea. But I think it's pretty clear that it would be extraordinary if the Russians were to not take more than Donbas and Crimea at this point. The Ukrainians pretty soon are not going to have a leg left to stand on. Their military is, by all accounts that I've seen, that are actually reporting on the situation in the east, where there's actual fighting going on. Not on Kiev, not the whole situation in Kiev, but everything that I'm hearing and the maps that I'm seeing, which are not being effectively disputed, show that Ukrainian forces are not yet in total collapse, but they're being surrounded, they're being constricted, and they're being split into smaller and smaller groups. I think that in some time, inevitably in the future, the Ukrainian armed forces will cease to function as a conventional army. And so at that point, the Russians will be able to dictate whatever terms they want. So why would the Russians, after they've expended all of this blood and treasure, why would they be willing, or why would they only settle for the compromise that they wanted to strike as the war started? At this point, it's kind of sunk costs. They've already spent this much. They've already gone this far. So why wouldn't they take as much as they can get? Why wouldn't they take as much as they want? The humanitarian corridor strategy, which they employed in Syria, and are now employing in Ukraine, the more I think about it, it is, I don't want to call it ethnic cleansing, but it is an effective way of starting with a clean slate as far as the population is concerned. Because if they move all the civilians out, or everybody who wants to leave, they say, hey, if you want to leave, now's your chance. Well, obviously, all the people who don't like Russia are going to leave automatically. And there might be people who do like Russia who leave too. But if the people who don't like Russia leave, and a lot of the people who do like Russia leave because they want to avoid the battle, the Russians go in and either force the military folks who are left behind to surrender, or they eradicate them, annihilate them, kill them. The Ukrainian military guys are out, so the Russians have control of that territory. Then the civilians start to come back. If the Russians control that area, odds are the civilians who don't like the Russians probably are not going to want to go back. They're going to stay. Stay where, you may ask? Who knows? They're going to stay wherever they go, whether that's Western Ukraine, whether that's Poland, but they're not going to go back to, let's say, Russian-held Mariupol. The people who do go back are, it is going to be the people who originally lived there, but not all of them. It's going to be the ones who go back who are willing to live under Russian rule, who either want to live under the Russians or will tolerate living under the Russians. And so at that point, the Russians will have a very compliant population. This war is displacing a lot of people temporarily. And that is, I think, largely by design. You're displacing everyone. And so that at the end of the day, the people who the Russians don't want around i.e. people who don't like Russia, Western-minded Ukrainians, even if they live in the East, people who are of, a Western mind, who consider themselves to be a part of the West, they're not going to want to come back and live under Russian rule. And so the Ukrainians who do want to live under Russia are going to be the ones who go back. And not to mention I believe it was 2 million Ukrainians who left, who ostensibly, were pro-Russia, who left after the Maidan coup of 2014 and all the fighting that caused and all that unrest. Those people a lot of them, I would think, would come flooding back into Ukraine. And so at the end of the day, whatever part of Ukraine that Russia decides to keep for itself, which I think will extend beyond Crimea and Donbas at this point, guaranteed. I do, because there's no chance that the Ukrainians are going to take the deal that the Russians are offering. And some people, I think this is probably true at this point. People like Gonzalo Lira are saying even if the Ukrainians accepted at this point, the Russians wouldn't live up to that bargain. They wouldn't be true to their word, because they have no intention at this point of only taking Donbas and Crimea. And at first I was thinking, I really questioned, could the Russians hold on to this territory? Would there be some kind of insurgency? And as I've seen things unfold, the methods that the Russians are using, the humanitarian corridors combined with the cauldrons, I think will largely cleanse, if you want to use a euphemism, cleanse these lands of people who don't like Russia. The Russians are telling them, leave peacefully or stay and be killed. And then, once everyone either leaves peacefully or stays and is killed, Russia is starting over with a clean slate, and that area will be repopulated. And the people who are going to want to move into this Russian-held territory, like I said, they're not going to be anti-Russian. Even if these are people who want to go back and fight, be sleepers, whatever, that's going to be a minority. Most people don't want to move into an area just so they can wage an insurgency. Once they've left, if they've found safe harbor somewhere, they're going to want to stay there. Look at the Nakba and Israel-Palestine. The villages that were raised by the Israelis, the populations that were driven out by the Israelis, once they were gone, they were gone. They're never coming back. And those people wore around, their house keys around their neck to the day that they died as proof that they once lived there. But they're never coming back. Their children are never going back, and their grandkids are never going back. The Israelis got them out of there. And in that case, it was ethnic cleansing, so there is no chance that any of them really could come back. The so-called Palestinian right to return won't happen because they're not going to be able to slink in and claim to be Jews. It's obvious that they're not Jews, and so they're not going to be welcomed into Israel. But in the case of Ukraine, it's not quite as clean of an ethnic cleansing because there's not so much a big bold line between Ukrainians and Russians when you get into the East. When you have Ukrainians that speak Russian as a first language, and or Orthodox Christians, at that point it's kind of a crapshoot. Are these people Russian or Ukrainian? And they'll call themselves Ukrainians, but how do you really distinguish them from a Russian? It's not like the Russians are going to be able to screen them and say, oh, you're not allowed in. And so it is possible for this sleeper cell idea to happen, for all these people to come back into Russian-held Ukraine and secretly hate Russia and want to overthrow the Russians. But I don't think they'll want to, at this point, what I question most of all, what I'm on the fence about, is will the Russians want to take Kiev or leave Kiev to be the capital of a rump Ukrainian state? From a historic perspective, I look at it, Kiev was the original Russian capital, it was the Kievan Rus. That is where Russia gets its name, is from the Rus. But it is on the west side of the Dnieper. And the Dnieper forms a pretty, neat line, although not including Odessa. Kiev is kind of in the northern part there. I mean, it's not right in the middle of really this, I guess you would say, the heartland of, more Russian-leaning Ukraine. I mean, I'm sure that the city has changed a lot in the last 30 years. Yes, once upon a time, from what I understand, you go to Kiev, everybody speaks Russian. But I mean, now, you look at it, they don't even call it Kiev anymore. Everywhere in the Western media, I mean, you see it. It just happened in the last couple of years. Now, all of a sudden, it's Kiev. But then again, just as the Ukrainian nationalists, I'm sure, have done a lot to change the demographics of Kiev. I'm just guessing here. I don't know that for a fact. I would imagine that, employing the cauldron strategy and extracting the civilian population, which lots of, a lot of the civilians, I believe, have already been evacuated from Kiev. I've heard as much as half of the city's population has been evacuated. Theoretically, if they do that, they get the people out, then they militarily, take it back, starve it. I'm sure they would want to do a lot to try and preserve the city there. They don't want to destroy, what is, at the end of the day, a historically Russian city. I think that they could take it back and repopulate it with people who like Russia. And again, none of this is an endorsement. I'm not cheering this on. It's not something that I necessarily want to see happen. I don't like to see any of it happen. I didn't like seeing the Ukrainian Nazis, do what they've done over the past few years since the Maidan. I don't like seeing, them tearing down statues and renaming streets after Nazis, just like I don't like seeing Democrats in America tearing down statues and renaming streets after, George Floyd. But that doesn't mean it's something worth fighting a war over. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't matter what I think, because this isn't my fight. I'm not passionate about either side. The people who are passionate about, either side are the ones who are going to decide this. And the Russians, as each of these weeks go by, their hand strengthens. And if, the Western media and the pro-Ukrainian, talking heads are right, and the Russians are suffering so many losses and blah, 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 and this has been taken such a toll on them, well, then, the Russians are going to be emboldened to try and grab as much as they can. They're not going to be magnanimous in their victory, in their eventual victory. They're going to want to take as much as they can so that they feel like, the blood that they've shed has not been in vain. I think it's unfortunate that the puppet masters who control Zelensky have not heeded Putin's warning when he has repeatedly said, that if you continue down this road, your country will cease to exist. Now, even I don't think that Putin will gobble up all of it, but I think that the goalposts for the Russians have probably moved. I think that they've moved significantly. I mean, not too long ago, the Russians, their position was for a federated Ukraine, or federated, probably loosely affiliated Ukraine that at least still shared one flag. Something where the Donbas had a status similar to the two constituent governments of Bosnia, but nevertheless an arrangement which kept Ukraine unified on a world map. As they get pushed more and more, and the Russians have to exert more and more effort to achieve their goals, I think that they are going to move those goalposts. They're going to say, hey, now that we're already at it, let's just go for more. We're going to go big or go home. And so who knows? The longer this goes on, the Russians may just keep pushing further and further west. They may take Kiev. They may take, lands even further than that. I don't think that they'll take the Galician heartland because they're you don't have a lot of Russians there. Historically, it was never part of Russia. It's part of Austria, which, was an enemy of Russia. And then after that, it was part of Poland, which, of course, was an enemy of Russia. It is, it's a land that belongs more it's associated more with the idea of the intermarium than it is Ruski Mir. And I think that Putin's made it clear that he understands that. So I think that that part of the country is probably still pretty safe. Long term, that is. In the short term, who knows? I mean, it is still at war. But long term, I would expect that the Ukrainian flag, or at least some flag other than the Russian flag, will continue to fly. Something that I recommend that I think that would be relevant, for my fellow Americans listening to this, is even though it's incredibly slanted against the Serbs, it's a very good documentary in that it has interviews with all of the people at the time, and it's a contemporaneous account of the war in Yugoslavia. It was called The Death of Yugoslavia. It was like a 5-part, really long documentary series by the BBC. And again, it's a BBC thing. It's very anti-Serb, and therefore, by extension, very anti-Russian, although the Russians are mentioned a whole lot in the documentary. So keep that in mind. But it's, and so the whole documentary is about, oh, Serbia is bad for this reason and that reason, and all these other guys who did bad things too. Well, we're just going to not focus on that so much. But you see in that how the dynamics changed throughout the war, and how, the goalposts shift and things like that, and what they're trying to do. The way that started at first, the Serbs just wanted to raise their own profile within Yugoslavia. And then Yugoslavia started falling apart, for financial reasons, and the Slovenes decided, hey, maybe we'd rather not be a part of this backward communistic federation, and maybe we'd rather just be our own country. And then all of a sudden you see the Croats and the Serbs each gearing up and saying, hey, I mean, if we're going to be our own country, we need to secure our borders and things, and start, make sure we protect our populations within Yugoslavia, because you had all these people living around who were not necessarily within the borders of, the territorial divisions of Yugoslavia associated with their ethnicity. You had Croats living outside Croatia. You had a lot of Serbs living outside of Serbia. And the whole war at any given point, it was kind of each, it was all the different sides saying, hey, how much can we get? How much of our people can we get, living under our flag? And I think that if we ever get, an honest account of this history, from the Russian side, we will, and from the Russian side, I mean something that shows what the Russians were thinking throughout this war. I think that that's what it'll be about. The Russians thinking, hey, how much of, what we consider to be Russia can we get under the Russian flag? It won't just be idealism that determines what their goals are. It's, it's realism. It's what they think they can accomplish. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.